You're listening to a podcast from Blogging Heads TV.
Hi, welcome to Culture Determined on Blogging Heads TV. I'm your host, Ari Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is a woman who writes behind a pseudonym, and her name is Default Friend. Default, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi. Most people know me as Default Friend now. It's weird, even in public. I write an advice column, and sometimes I comment on culture, and now I also have a podcast of my own.
Well, congratulations on the new podcast. I think you're the person who maybe has been who I'm aware of has been most productive during the pandemic. You have a newsletter, a podcast. You're involved in this startup that whose co-founder, Justin Murphy, I had on the show a couple months ago. So you've been very busy, but we're mainly going to be talking about the topic of your podcast, and the name of the podcast is After the Orgy. And what's sort of the one or two line summary of the podcast?
I find there's a lot of commentary about feminism and gender relations, and our new sort of, I don't want to call it woke culture, because I don't totally subscribe to that description of it, but there was a lot of cultural changes that are becoming super visible right now. And my thesis is it's because of things that happened between 2008 and 2014. So my co-host and I are, for the most part, exploring what went sideways during the Obama administration that got us to the point we are now.
Mm-hmm. And what is the title itself? What is that a reference to?
It's a reference to a Baudrillard. I feel like such a dork not being able to pronounce that correctly, but a quote, what are we going to do after the orgy? So it's referencing, we're sort of in that after the orgy period right now. And so what's in that? Sorry. What was Baudrillard, if that's how you pronounce his name, this French poet or writer, whatever? I don't know how to pronounce it either. What was he referring to? And then what is the orgy that you are discussing? He was discussing, if I'm recalling correctly, this is the personality girl, who's my co-host, chose this title, the excesses of, basically the excesses of liberalism. And we're discussing the same thing. I think that period of time he was referencing was right after the sexual revolution. But we're talking about the period of time, we feel like there's a sort of oversaturation of sex positivity, to give one example, or openness about one's personal life during millennials' early adulthood. Mm-hmm. And why did it happen then? How did it happen? How did it manifest? And what are the impacts on our lives now? Sometimes we go a little bit off topic, but we're really, the heart of it is really those cultural observations.
Mm-hmm. So when you wrote in your newsletter that you were debuting a new podcast, I think the phrase you used was neo-prudery, and that immediately interested me. I think I messaged you even right then, being I haven't listened to your show yet, but I'm interested in talking to you about it on my show, because that was an idea I hadn't heard before and sounded interesting. Are you still sticking with that? I mean, I'm bringing up that term. You aren't. Is that still something you're interested in? And if so, what's the definition of it that you subscribe to?
So that was sort of tongue in cheek. Our first episode, we were talking about sex addiction and kind of critiquing this idea that sex addiction isn't real. And that's why we used the phrase neo-prude, because it feels like if you have any kind of conversation around boundaries, people automatically start labeling you as this or that. However, neo-prude is a real term that it's either Louise Perry or Helen Roy. They're both really great feminist writers. I think it might be Louise Perry who
who uses that phrase to describe herself. And it's this like, it's like a reaction to third wave feminism and this idea of like, being a little bit more deliberate about your sexual choices.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So 2008, I'm thinking back, I'm casting my mind back 13 years. So things that happened in that year were Obama was elected and the financial crisis started. And also, I looked this up. I was 1 year off. In 2007 was when the iPhone debuted. So those are all big events. Why do you think 2008 is a turning point in the story of the relationship between men and women?
Well, the other thing about 2008 is this is when you start seeing people really overshare online en masse. People have always been oversharing online, but it used to sort of be like a sideshow attraction. Like Jenny Cam was enough of like a thing to, make it on Letterman. And for people who don't know who Jenny Cam is, there's a young woman, I think she was in her early 20s, who in the early 2000s and I think late 90s just streamed her whole life 24/7 and gave everyone this peek into the most intimate parts of her life. And by 2008, you're seeing more and more people just, give everything, whether it's through like LiveJournal, which is a more mainstream expression of blogs, which is, have always been around, or, social media. Like Facebook is, college students can start using Facebook, I think 2005, 2006, maybe even a little bit earlier. By 2008, you have high school students and, other young adults who aren't necessarily affiliated with a university on Facebook. So I think like people underrate how much of an impact on culture that had.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, I have a memory, and I think this was 2008. So it was the first time that I went out to dinner with someone and that person took out their phone and left it face up on the table during the meal. And if I have this chronology right, I remember I didn't have a smartphone at that point, and probably most people did it. If I have this chronology right, it would have been like February 2008, because I remember it was right around the time of the New Jersey Democratic primary between Obama and Hillary. And I remember being shocked by that. It seemed like rude to me. I was like, who does this guy think he is? Like, he's got to, and this is in the evening. I was like, who is going to be like messaging him? This is also one of the first people I ever knew who was on Twitter. So this person was an early adopter, and of course, that became the norm, or more or less. I assume it would still be considered a little bit rude sometimes, but yeah, there's nothing shocking about that anymore. So there were some changes, and some of them were technological and other ones were cultural, and a lot of them involved a mixture between the two. And so there were a lot of, so there's this term sex positivity, and I associate that with terms like, like slut shaming and being against slut shaming and body positivity and other sort of movements that maybe at least became more popular through online. Do you think we've run the course on those, at least the sex positivity part of that?
I think so. I think the problem is it sort of became like a runaway train. And as, like activist ideas or things that like made sense in certain niches, become more mainstream, they become more and more divorced from their original purpose and like perhaps the original message. And, between 2008 and 2014 is really when it becomes kind of a fad. And you have all these like Jezebel style, Vice is another one, style sites, like being very open and very provocative about, certain sexual behaviors. Now it's interesting because I feel like we've reached the point where we've been so open about sexuality that it's actually starting to feel a little bit passé to continue it. Like it feels very millennial. It's just because this isn't the way things are, right? Like it's a trend that we've been it's just way too oversaturated. It's too many places where it's still around, right? Like everyone's talking about their OnlyFans, and you flip through TikTok and people are talking about their one night stands, but it's become transgressive to react against that.
Right. So you're the one who has been, you found at least one point before finding TikToks of young women, maybe even teens who were like, posting things that were like anti-sex positivity. Is sex negativity? Is that a term that's used, or is that too far?
I think that. So I use these terms like sort of a little bit off label. I think that's actually like referring to something else, but I would describe the behaviors I see emerging as sex negative, because it's not just it's not just critical, right? It's sort of actively like people have like casual sex fatigue, or they're not having sex at all. In some cases, they might be virgins. We hear a lot about it on the male side, but there's a lot of women who are celibate, both voluntarily and involuntarily. People are having less sex than ever, and I feel like statistics really back that up.
Yeah, and so some people call those the involuntary celibates the incels, and then the voluntary celibates the volcels, and those terms became like heavily freighted with various cultural meanings over the past 5 or so years. But that, you could see that. Well, you could see the incel stuff as sort of both a part of, and I guess and like a counter reactionary turn against sex positivity. Because it was sort of like the guys who were left behind or something once some group of women started, speaking frankly about sexuality, maybe in the way that only men used to. Is it like with the kids, like, is it cool to be voluntarily celibate or involuntarily celibate? This reminds me of that stupid tweet from that weirdo online reactionary guy, Prison Planet, where he said conservatism is the new punk rock. But is it sort of like it's now cool to not be sex positive?
I think there's two things going on. I think there have been a lot of people who have genuinely been burned, and especially for millennial women who were. I don't think like hooking up is new, right? Like anyone who's sort of just been around in the world knows that that's sort of like one of these like media fabrications. But the way and the amount of people, and even like the amount of rejection some people are getting, right, is like completely new. So I do think some of it's fatigue from that, and not having any sort of like kinship networks or more experienced people to help shepherd you through that. Or it's a lot of like the blind leading the blind. And then some of it is like, as millennials get older and some of them are still hanging on to, ideas of sex positivity. It's how the younger generation can react against that and say like, okay, like our millennial forebears are talking about like all the anal sex they're having or whatever. And like, being very, very, very open about who they are, and every stray thought that floats through their head. How we could rebel against that is by not being like that. And then I guess there's like the third piece is there is a sizable segment of Zoomers who have like the OnlyFans or it's like they have their own TikToks that are like very, very sexualized. And that's more mainstream. So like, how do you identify against what's generally accepted as like, this is the way things are? You go in the opposite direction. And that's what the opposite direction is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So while the idea that conservatism is the new punk rock, I think, was not borne out to be true over the past 5 or so years.
I totally disagree, though. I actually do think it's true that it's the only like transgressive thing is to be this sort of like flavor of conservative that isn't the sort of like I don't want to say like boomer conservatism, but it's like it's this other type of being conservative that isn't recognizable as like the guy in the pickup truck with the bumper stickers, and it's not like the Prius driving mom with the pussy hat, or the super woke office worker, or even like the apathetic but well-meaning person who's like a little bit of each. It's like this other weird thing that is definitely like right wing, but it's sort of the only thing left, because you can't like shock the middle class with being liberal anymore, or even being like left wing of any variety.
Okay,
all that's left is right.
Yeah, I mean, so that sounds sort of like the alt-right to me, where it was, the shocking thing was that they were, ironically, quote unquote, using, swastika imagery and, joking about white nationalism and stuff. And that seemed to, that was countercultural for sure. But that sort of petered away after the, Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017. And after Twitter at least went after a lot of these accounts to just ban them, that were tweeting, concentration camp oven memes at people with Jewish surnames.
It's not just that. I mean, think about who, like who's in the counterculture right now. Like the counterculture, like certainly like isn't the like Marxists with septum piercings. The counterculture is really like these, and people accuse me of having Twitter brain, but if even if you go out into the wild and to meet space, you see this is true. The counterculture are people who are adopting right-wing signifiers because it has become so corporate to be what the old counterculture was. And I would say, like, when I was growing up, it was shocking to say you were like a Marxist or something, and it was shocking to have like an undercut and dye your hair blue, or whatever thing. Not to be so like stereotypical about it, but I mean, like, I meet Brooklyn artists all the time who are like flirting, who probably aren't actually like in practice right wing, but they're sort of defensively right wing because it's all there's left, and that's the only way you could really scandalize the institution, I think.
So there was a video, and it's possible that you're obviously a conduit for me seeing a lot of things happening on TikTok, because I don't have the app myself. But there's this video that was going around of these women who were possibly Mennonite who were cooking in a kitchen, and whoever's taking the video is asking them like, "Who is Kanye West?" or something like this. Did you see this one?
Oh yeah, I commented on it too. Yeah. Okay,
it must have been you. So then someone retweeted this, being like something along the lines of like, they're gonna have to like batten the doors because I'm like gonna come busting through to try to steal these women. So, and this was someone with like I don't know if it was an anime avatar, but it wasn't. This was like an anonymous person, and I guess so that, as I understand it, is like, there's a type of guy out there who desperately wants a traditional woman to be with and to, be his wife and raise his children. And the only people who are like uncorrupted by the evils of modern culture are these people in like separatist sort of cultures, like the Amish or the Mennonites, who have never heard of, Kim Kardashian and don't know what twerking is, but they're like, attractive 17-year-olds with long hair. And so that's like a new ideal. So that's countercultural for sure. But I guess there's a difference between counterculture and punk rock, I think, because, punk rock said like, fuck the system, and we're going to like vomit on stage on each other. And whereas this guy is saying like, oh, I just want to like marry a woman who has like, a bonnet on her head.
Like in a world where like Gigi Allen is like working at Starbucks, right? And that's the ideal like Starbucks employee. I mean, again, like of course I'm like exaggerating quite a bit here, but like in a world where what used to be considered punk is now for the most part mainstream, if not like kind of like actively pushed by corporations. The only way you can rebel is by saying like, like fuck it, like the Amish have got it right. It's like it's been so kind of colonized that everything's kind of flipped on its head.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that there's like a logic to thinking like, oh, the only groups that have been uncorrupted are these, like the Mennonites, or I don't know if there's people out there who are lusting after like Orthodox Jews. That would be another group, or just this like, did you see, this is not the same thing, but did you see this Twitter thing going around yesterday about this sort of black separatist Marxist group that was going into like the high like Sierras or something and claiming that they had appropriated some land to build their own community?
No, I didn't see that.
I believe the group is named Black Hammer, and they gained some online level of attention because their initial thing that went viral was they were against Anne Frank, and they were saying Anne Frank was a colonizer and she deserved what she got. And so this is horrifying to 99.9% of the people out there, but this like young group of maybe Maoist sort of black nationalist inflected youth coming from, I think they were in San Francisco, maybe I'm wrong. They were, shocking the bourgeoisie by saying, fuck that bitch Anne Frank, she deserved what she got. She was just another colonizer and we need to like reclaim the land for ourselves. So then yesterday they tweeted, like they still have cell access, so they're not that far from civilization, that they had, this group of like seemingly 10 or so young people that all wearing the matching t-shirts had appropriated acres of land for their new community, and they were inviting all colonized or BIPOC people to come and join them in this new society. So that's like, I guess that's the sort of thing from the other end of looking for like trying to find or make a new society that's not corrupted by the horrors of American culture. But anyway, that's just a bizarre side note, and Twitter exposes us to all these strange things. But okay, what are these people doing? Like, are they doing like sort of promise ring kind of stuff, or they're just waiting for marriage, or are they just sort of pining for a different society? Are they, or are they just posting angry memes? What are they doing?
I think there's a lot of different expressions of it. I do think there is a lot more like marriage talk with younger people. And again, this is like super visible to me, like in real life as well as on Twitter, in a way that like I remember when I was in my early 20s, it really shocked people when I got married. And not that it didn't happen, because like when I moved to Texas, there tons of people were married at my age, but within like a certain strata of folks, it's like I never want to have kids. I'm going to get married at 30, and that was kind of everyone's calling card. And now I'm noticing like the reverse happen. It's like, okay, millennials waited so long. Even if people aren't practicing this, right? There's a lot of like much younger people talking about like family planning, and talking about a coupling up.
By family planning, you don't mean in the Margaret Sanger sense. You mean planning to have a family?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I hear about people wanting to get married too, like all the time. And if you look at like Justin's like arranged marriage project, like a quick aside, my friend Justin Murphy is who's also on this show. He is setting people up to get married. I mean, that was like, he got like, I think like thousands of applications or something. Like it was super, super popular. A lot of people are really hungry for it. Whether or not it comes to fruition, that's another thing, but people desire it for sure.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like, there's this, I mean, this is like sort of a well-worn chestnut at this point that, you know, people in blue states have like, you know, they vote and express the like cultural opinions of, you know, people who like embrace polyamory and, you know, microdose psychedelics or whatever. But, you know, the ones who, but in their lives, they mostly live like, you know, conventional 1950s lifestyles of marriage, you know, one or two kids, both parents have a stable job. So that may be somewhat different from the 1950s, but like, you know, if we're at least, and we're probably mainly talking about like white people and or professional people in this subset. So, you know, like the people I was friends with in college, almost all of them got married between like 28 to 32 or so. Some of them, such as me, got divorced afterwards, but you know, these are basically people, you know, well-educated people, most of them with some sort of graduate degree, and they were not living in polycules. They were, you know, partnering up, and some of them were having children. So that's, you know, that kept on happening, and like marriage as a cultural, you know, like destination point for everyone's life continued to be like a huge part of the narrative during our like 20s, and, you know, shows like Say Yes to the Dress and so forth, like continued to make it seem, and like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette continued to make it seem like marriage was, you know, like the ultimate endpoint of someone's life. So some people were living in, you know, were living different lives, and some people were, you know, hooking up with different people very often, whereas plenty of other people were, you know, continuing with sort of conventional stuff, even if they were like maybe fine with like living next door to someone who was in a polycule or something like that.
I mean, so I'm not one of these people who thinks that like everyone under the age of 35 is leading this very sort of like sexually progressive life. I do believe that, you know, maybe like mid to younger millennials were exposed to a much more casual attitude to sex than had ever really existed before, or at least like it was more mainstream in a way where, like, you know, like if you were to go to your mother or father for advice, they might be like mystified by the culture. But I also think like you have this phenomenon. I mean, and again, like this is sort of like statistically backed up, like people have been getting married like much later, you know, having children much later. And there is like an impact to hitting those milestones in your 30s, you know, in some cases like in your mid 30s and your late 30s, than in your early 20s. Mm-hmm. I think it has like a huge impact on people to have kids late, if at all, and then also to have like older parents. And I totally agree with you. Like I was sort of like romantically normal, if you will. My siblings are also like romantically normal, like for lack of a better way of putting it. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I've been invited to like 3 weddings. One of them is my own like siblings. And it's not because I don't have friends. It's like my friends just like aren't getting married yet. And I don't know if they will. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really in the air. There's like a sense of like putting it off, or like, this is something that is in like the narrative realm of television. But it's even like reflected in media. Like it's now become like a media trope. The sort of late 20s, early 30s single person is the norm, not like the freak show that gets thrown in for comic effect.
Mm-hmm. So okay. So the reasons for that one could give that this happened was, it harder to get oneself established professionally.
and have enough of a salary that you feel like you could, make that commitment. And that often comes with like buying a house and getting ready to have kids, which are all things that take, that are very expensive. And, the expectation that many people in the dreaded PMC, which is professional managerial class, like need to get a graduate degree in order to become the professional managerial type person they want to. So they're in school for, longer than just college. And maybe they're not even entering the job market until they're in their late 20s to begin with. And so they're concentrating on their own education instead of, thinking about settling down. So that's part of it. But then also like, the dating app stuff. And we did a previous episode where we talked about dating apps and how it can make it seem like there's infinite possibility out there. And, why settle for one person when there's 100,000 potential other people out there? So that plays a role. I mean, do you think that the statistic of average age that a woman gets married for the first time or whatever the benchmark is, do you think that's going to start heading back down because of people feel like they were waiting too long, or are we sort of in a situation where that can't happen?
No, I think for sure. I don't think it's going to be like, in the next 5 years or something. Or like, I don't think it's going to be immediately visible. I think we're going to see more and more people do it in this like kind of countercultural way, and till like sort of worms its way back into the mainstream in the same way that waiting kind of, it became like, oh, like my cousin got married at, like 33. And then it was like kind of like this one-off anecdote that you'd have. And then suddenly it's like, this is kind of just the way people are doing it. I think like the reverse is going to happen. And I also think like we're going to see it be more normalized to like lower your standards, I think, and just to like settle for people. Another thing is, again, like I think this is an extreme that like certainly like not everyone's doing, but it is kind of like in the water. And there also is some research to say that like this isn't such a bad thing for marriages, but trying to like optimize for like the perfect partner or like the best possible partner that you yourself can find. And I think we're going to see a move away from that. In the same way, I think we're just seeing a move away in general from this kind of like self-help culture, pop psychology culture that we're in. I think it's all interrelated. And again, like, the idea that like you put off marriage for a little bit and you're with someone who, for a fact that you have like shared values with. I mean, there's like significant evidence that like those relationships are much stronger, but there's also trade-offs there. One of them being it's like you have your first child much later in life, or, you're having certain experiences with your other half much later in life that perhaps, your kids will look at you, or the younger people in your life will look at you and say, that's great, but I want to hit that at 25 instead of 35.
Can you say more about how you see self-help culture or the reaction against self-help culture playing into this?
Sure. I mean, I think it's kind of in the air, like optimizing everything. And I also will preface this with a lot of these trends that that I'm thinking of and that I'm seeing are very anchored in the upper middle class. So it's certainly like, this isn't the only way of life or only experience, but, if you look at like the popularity of, say, someone like Bronze Age Pervert, who like is one of these people where, explain
who that person is for people who have.
Yeah, sure. So he's a right-wing bodybuilder internet celebrity. And people like him and Paul Scalise, who calls himself the Lindy Man, they both have like a strong emphasis on tradition. And I would also say like human intuition. And these are people who are actually like quite popular, who if you bring them up, you get written off as like, oh, they belong online. This is just an online thing. But more people know about these guys than it seems on the surface. And I think there's signs that people are kind of sick of like the optimization culture, or like at least in the way that we've come to know it. And maybe things that are like tried and true are more attractive and are more conducive to happiness than kind of this, like, you know, what we've been, you know, pushing now. This attraction to tradition, even if it is maybe like a little bit of a performance, seems to be like a reaction to what we have now, like, you know, like therapy culture, you know, like, I think sort of like spiritually, like wearing the Apple Watch and counting your steps and having, you know, like your heart rate perfectly monitored, and having like the, you know, the vegan Tuesday and Thursday, right? Like, I think people want to move away from that.
There's definitely, this Bronze Age pervert guy who is a Twitter account. I think he is anonymous. And he has 65,000 followers on Twitter. And Bronze Age Mantis is his handle if you want to investigate him. He is sort of, was he like a Trump booster, or did he just sort of ride the wave of that stuff? But anyway, I guess it doesn't matter. But he's selling something different in his, but I mean, what you're talking about reminds me a lot of like Silicon Valley culture, like I think there's a difference between like self-help and sort of like life hacking. Like the life hacking trend seems to have petered out. I don't know, probably the pandemic sort of ended the life hacking, because what the hell were you like optimizing for if you were stuck inside all the time? But you know, so like the life hacking stuff would be like, you know, you don't need to, from just basic stuff like setting out your clothes the night before so you want to decide in the morning to wear, to sort of like stranger stuff like drinking this stuff Soylent that is like this meal replacement.
But, you know, I think what people miss though is like, there's like a Silicon Valley like aesthetic, like there's like the Silicon Valley version of it, and then there's sort of like an East Coast version of it, but they're the same thing, right? Like the East Coast expression might be like, you know, like, so in Silicon Valley, it might be like your keto, and you have the Apple Watch and the Peloton, and, you know, you're counting everything or like whatever. But then like on the East Coast, the sort of like therapy culture, talking about holding space, being very, you know, it's sort of intentional, you know, finding new ways to navigate like the emotional landscape, both of them meeting at like new expressions of, you know, like relationship styles, pop psych books. These, I mean, they're two different aesthetics for like the same basic philosophy.
And what would that philosophy be?
Like trying to like, I don't want to say science, but like, you know, what is like trying to answer like what's the best way to live, without looking at what, you know, what can we learn from people in the past?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this move away from like mom's wisdom and sort of saying like, you know, what's the wisdom that we haven't yet discovered, if that phrasing is at all legible.
Okay, so would you connect this to the people who are very interested in like classical art and architecture and stoicism and other things, you know, rediscovering ancient philosophy, you know, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all facets of like the same like urge, and it can be hard to cluster these things together when they like seem so different. Like, you know, I think it's not intuitive to think like the tech bro, you know, like the tech bro with like the Fitbit or the Apple Watch is like the same person as like the Teen Vogue editor, you know, who is like really into like emotional honesty or something, like, but they're the same person in like a different outfit. And I think it sort of works the same way with people who are reacting against that.
Okay. I mean, so part of this is I had a theme that I was discussing both on Twitter and on the podcast over the past couple years about American life becoming cosplay. And this was evident in a lot of different spaces. And so on the left, you can say like rooting for Antifa and like putting on a black mask and then like going and pulling down a statue. That would be, one form of cosplay. And then on the right, it would be things like, putting like wearing paramilitary gear and having an assault rifle and like parading around during your protest wearing that. And so, and sort of a culmination of this was the, January 6th storming of the Capitol, where you had, people in these wacky costumes, some of whom may have been mentally ill, like, the QAnon shaman guy and the foreskin, headdress or whatever. But like people were, like literally dressing up in costumes and like going out and pretending to like enact like a moral drama in the way that, live action role playing people, would do by dressing up as like, medieval soldiers or something, or, people at Comic-Con would dress up as their favorite heroes. And I don't know, I have like a cynical view of the Bronze Age pervert. I don't follow him closely, so I can't say, but the people who I see online who, tweet photos of like Greco-Roman sculptures or something, and they're like, why can't we get back to this? Like, it's all just seems to be sort of like playing pretend and, playing dress up. And it seems to not have a strong connection to reality. And then like looking at Bronze Age pervert's Twitter bio, I mean, okay, Bronze Age pervert who wants us to live, I assume, more like people did in the Bronze Age, is a Twitter personality, sells his book on Amazon, has a podcast that you need to pay money to subscribe to. And his bio says, aspiring nudist bodybuilder, free speech, and anti-xenoestrogen activist. So I don't even know what xenoestrogen is. I assume it means foreign, female sex hormone. Maybe that's like an anti-trans thing. I don't even know. So this guy he's not like wanting to go live in the woods or something. He's fully living like a modern technological life, like regardless of what he's telling young men to do. So I don't know. I don't know if there's what even question I'm driving at here, but it seems performative in the same way that a lot of American politics in the Trump era were performative, and going to Trump himself, who was like, a performance artist. They did a whole episode with a scholar of performance art studies about Trump, viewing Trump as a performance artist as a way to understand him.
So
does this
so like you have like these big Twitter personalities, or these big figures, and I think they're vessels for ideas. And the more interesting thing to look at is like who's consuming the ideas and what of their ideas are they taking, right? Like it's not ever going to be the whole message, but what's resonating with people. Like with Bronze Age pervert, I would say has had a big impact, but I would say like the most visible one online and in real life is this idea of the importance of like physicality and bodybuilding. And it would definitely be like a lie to say that, men aren't rediscovering bodybuilding in this sort of political way as sort of a refuge from modern life. The LARPing question is interesting. I mean, I do think a lot of people exaggerate and LARP, but I still have to, question like, what is it, what values are attractive to them, whether or not they're capable of living those values, and what of those values are they trying to live? You can't do it all because there's like certain economic constraints. Like you could want to be, as trad as you want, or, as, as strong as you want or as masculine as you want. But if you're not able to, because of your day-to-day life, like you go into an office or you go into a retail job or something, you're going to have certain limitations. But, are you still focused on that? Is it still what you think like your idealized state is? I think that's sort of like worth investigating.
So, I mean, just, so I just looked on Wikipedia for the article for bodybuilding. There's a subcategory, early history, stone lifting traditions or practice in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Tamalakam, I don't know what that is, and then Western weightlifting developed in Europe from 1880 to 1953, with strongmen displaying feats of strength for public and challenging each other. So, bodybuilding does not go back to the Bronze Age. Bodybuilding is like a modern
when you're getting like too fixated on that, like who cares, right? I'm just saying he's like one of like maybe like 50 people, right, who has enough of a following that seems like it's cordoned off to be like, I don't know his full personal philosophy, or I don't listen to his podcast or anything, but I like as someone who's like very outside of that realm, I could also like name what one of his chief impacts has been, and I think like often it's not like people like literally like the trads are another people who are coming up a lot, and like what tradition, like what do you want to go back to? No one really has an answer for that because it's not a centralized movement, but what they do have in common is they want to go back to a time where there were real or imagined that where family values were more central, and people have certain limitations, but it's still important to them. And I agree. It is sort of a LARP, but then what's the alternative to LARPing if you have to pay your bills? And, like you can't grow your own vegetables because you don't have the time and you don't have the space for it because you live in a condo and that's the only thing you could afford. And that's the only type of space that you can live in your town. But what these people's values are is important.
Mm-hmm. Well, so it's sort of like these Black Hammer people, they have this idea that they're going to go build a self-sufficient society in the mountains. God bless them. They're probably, some of them are going to severely injure themselves or die trying to do this. It's just like impossible to actually get back to the land in any sense. I don't know. So, yeah, I mean, so, Trump's slogan was "Make America Great Again," and it was always unclear what he meant exactly by that. My best theory was that he meant he wanted to return to a TV version of the 1950s. And so so that is a huge cultural symbol of, what like the suburban American ideal was and that people want to get back to. But, it was kind of, it's just like it's like a fake nostalgia. I'm also reminded of, I didn't read the book, but Michelle Goldberg wrote a book and she came on Blogging Heads when it came out in 2015 or so about the origins of yoga in the West. And I mean, that's a similar thing to bodybuilding, I guess, where, it has some link to things that happened in, India thousands of years ago, but it's really this mishmash of like British Army calisthenics and other like modern dance things that were spun together and given a surface or patina of like ancient Chinese wisdom. Obviously not Chinese, that's a joke, sort of bullshit, so that people are like, feel like they're doing something real instead of looking at their phone all day.
Like bodybuilding, to circle back to that is like, bodybuilding as we know it might be, like an invention of like 1880s, like circuses or whatever. I don't know the precise history of it, but like being grounded in your own body and strength being a virtue is a tale as old as time. And I think and to like go back to the yoga thing, it's like yoga as we understand it might not have the tradition and the history that people think it does, especially like divorced from a religious context, but it does bring people back to like a ritualized, embodied way of being that they don't otherwise have access to. And it's, the best you can do in a secular society.
Yeah. And then something that Robert Reich, the founder of Blogging Heads, he has mentioned, and he wrote a book called Why Buddhism is True, is that, meditation as is practiced in the West is not widely practiced in actual Buddhist societies, that it's mostly just like priests or like novitiates, whatever the correct term is, are the ones who meditate, and lay people don't meditate. So it's, Western culture took some part of this ancient system of beliefs, but not the entire thing. Okay, we've gotten a bit far from the original topic, but obviously, lots of things are swept up in this. Okay, so we did an episode a little over a year ago where we talked about online dating apps, and that was actually the last episode I taped before the pandemic lockdown started. So, and once that happened, it obviously everyone's life changed immediately, but also the sort of things that you were talking about as wanting to get off of dating apps to return to, like, going to a bar and catching someone's eye, that became impossible. And so if you wanted to, get with someone, and you weren't with someone already, the dating apps were kind of the only way to do it. So people were stuck in that for some period of time. Now, normal life is sort of returning, and there's all this, it's like a joke meme at this point that there's going to be like a hot vax summer where all their pent up energies are going to be directed into hooking up with strangers and stuff. So how do you think that interacts with what you're seeing? And are even the people who are like countercultural, are they still like jonesing to like just go out to a bar and pick someone up or get picked up and have a fling because we've been deprived of so much human contact over the past year?
I think everyone, period, all the time, regardless of their engagement with dating apps, like would prefer that it was like easier, like socially, right? Like on the most foundational level to meet someone. But also I think like, many people have like a longing that they were attractive enough to meet people in real life, which I think is like another thing that makes like dating apps appealing to certain people. But then you realize like, you're just not like, there's just no space for you. It's just hard to attract someone.
So in a sense, there's, did you see this piece that, the writer, is her name Talia Levin, wrote about something like a blog?
She's been blocked on Twitter. So I retaliated by like muting her name. And now she's totally off my radar.
Okay. So that's a good excuse. It was a humor piece, I think. And it was briefly the central thing that the dozen or so people or a couple dozen who, set the tone on Twitter were discussing. And it's basically like, she was feeling already left out of the hot vax summer because she felt like, she was still her blobbish, and she kept on using the word blob, physical self. And there were all these over the top descriptions of her, physical body shape, and some of which were funny, other ones, which if I was the editor, I would have cut them out because it just went on too long. But yeah, so she was like, everyone in the world is getting ready to get out again and have sex, but I'm still like stuck in this body that I like hate myself for, and I haven't been able to, improve myself over the course of the pandemic. And I don't know if there's an expectation that like people are going to be better than they were before, at least physically, once we return to normal. That seems like I feel like people are going to be more forgiving of each other's like faults in various ways because we've been so isolated for so long. But yeah, so I don't know if that piece counts as sex positive or sex negative, but that is sort of a,
possible reaction. But I mean, I guess even the fact that she wrote this piece is in some way on the sex positive side of the ledger, because she's talking publicly and in print about things that maybe 25 years ago people wouldn't talk publicly about. I guess another thing is that, if part of the like reaction of young people who are sick of millennials oversharing online is that they're going to sort of make their lives somewhat more private, which seems that would be logical to me, and it definitely seems like it could happen. How do we, where's this sort of an absence of evidence of absence thing? Like, how do we know this, what they're doing? I don't know I have zero contact with people who are in their late teens, early 20s, aside from like TikTok videos that go viral. Most people probably still don't live their lives like constantly documenting them through an app. Like, that's probably still unusual. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Like, I don't know. Like, there's some group of people who probably are more or less going about their day without, saying, I'm telling you everything, or
I mean, I think people are pretty plugged in. And the problem is, it's like, it's easy to sort of view it through the lens of like people who have a huge audience. But even if you think about it, like, people like sending you just like they're on a walk and just like sending a picture because like something catches their eye, like their phone is out during the walk and they're not fully engaged in the walk. And I think like that's really common. And I think like these smaller behaviors might be like, like also like symptoms of what I'm talking about. Like there's certain like openness and like just, one-on-one conversations that will also go away. I mean, there's a lot of things happening. Wanting to be more private is also a product of cancel culture. Like, you don't want to be canceled. And again, like, cancellation isn't necessarily like you are up for like an audience of hundreds of thousands or hundreds, or everyone online is dogpiling you. Cancel culture is also like your individual group of friends saw like an essay you wrote in 9th grade, and maybe you shared it and it was a joke, and then it came off as like kind of racist or something, and everyone blew it out of proportion, and then you got ousted from the group. I mean, like, these things happen on like large and small scales. Mm-hmm. So like a lot of these adjustments will be they'll be most visible at the top with like the personalities, and where we could sort of see it like on Twitter and TikTok and wherever else, whatever other social platforms emerge. But then if you pay attention, you'll probably also be able to like observe them on like the micro scale. Like for me, like with younger people, I've noticed like a lot more, men too, like a lot more people I know between like 20 and 24, like, I really want to have kids. And I think I like mentioned that earlier in the conversation. Like, I didn't hear that at all. Like when I was, when I was in college, but my college age friends now it's like kind of a little bit transgressive.
So you shock your parents?
Yeah, you shock your parents and saying like, I'm not going to wait for the job or like the perfect person, and I'm just going to bite the bullet and do it. The sense that, being canceled doesn't mean like everyone suddenly finds out your name online and there's articles about you in the Times. Like I remember it may have been, I remember hearing a professor saying that his current students don't like discussing controversial topics in class. And then if he asks a question that's provocative, no one will raise their hand to answer. And what I thought was, these kids, like, they grew up entirely in a world where anything they do could be recorded, and then everyone has a phone in their pocket. And so if they raise their hand and start saying something, and then maybe someone gets offended by it and they're recording it and then they like send it out, then they're in trouble. So why not just like keep it to themselves instead of, and like, let's all get along, instead of being like the provocative student who gets attention in class. So that'd be another way that, and then
technology is
there's some people who like really crave attention. So you like this is like that's like the opposite's really, really common. And it was like super common in my generation to like purposely be over the top because you know everything's recorded. And then you have cancel culture emerge, and it's like, oh, you know, like, oh shit, like millennials are airing all their dirty laundry with the like, you know, express intention to get this kind of attention. And now, you know, being a provocateur will bite you in the ass and put you in a position where, like, if you're lucky, maybe you could be like a right-wing influencer. But if you're not, you know, it's like, now what?
Right. You know, I'm thinking a lot of, you know, like I said, I have very little connection to like people who are like teens or early 20s now, but you know, there's stories often about like YouTube influencers who, like, this guy, like Mr. Beast. There was just a piece about Mr. Beast in the Times, and I guess he is sort of does like YouTube pranks and stuff, but also he would do these things where he would just like give someone on the street $1,000 or something, so he came to be seen as a good guy, but maybe behind the scenes he was treating everybody he worked with as an asshole. It seems like a lot of, from what I can tell, of the young people, like they're you know, they're more often like ingesting content through YouTube or Twitch or TikTok, and then the people who are popular there are often like, doing like pranks or silly dances and stuff like that. And yeah, so you know, I don't know where I'm going with this, but that sort of, you know, like, and it often turns out that these people like Jake Paul or other people are often sort of have sociopathic tendencies that made them, you know, want to like mug in front of the camera and have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, like that. The sort of personality that makes you a YouTube influencer is probably like not the type of person you actually want like your child to be or something. So I don't know. I'm sure young people are going to get sick of that kind of stuff, but it's the popularity, at least for now, continues. And like this Mr. Beast guy partnered with a like fast food company or ghost kitchen company, and he had, during the pandemic, debuted like hundreds of like burger ghost kitchens where you could just order it online, and so he's raking in money, and he's, you know, like 22 years old. So I don't know, the information economy creates all these opportunities for people to become popular and make money, and then the type of person who does that is maybe not, you know, you wouldn't want them for your son-in-law or something. But anyway, I think if there's people who, if the young people want to be less online, I think that's probably a good thing. You know, as like mediating our lives through social media companies that don't have our best interests at heart anyway, but just want to.
I don't even know if it's less online.
Like that's been pretty bad.
Is the thing. It's just like a different way of being online, and like different kind of like signaling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think people are like, the best way to trend forecast, I think, is to like look at the different major social networks. Again, like, you know, they generally don't change, but sometimes they do. Like I certainly wouldn't look at Facebook, and in some cases not even Instagram, but like Twitter and TikTok right now, and see what people are saying. And it's like, that's what will sort of infiltrate the mainstream. And I'm a big believer that like Tumblr was like a really great, like if you wanted to know what life would be like today, or even like a few years ago, like look at Tumblr, you know, like again, like 2008 to like 2013, 2014. But there's like different ways of signaling and like different trends and different subcultures that will emerge as the dominant ones. So yeah, I don't think I think like confessing less online doesn't mean that you're less online. It's just you're online in a different way.
Okay, that makes sense. We're maybe moving towards the end of our time, but what are some other things that happened in this period you're thinking about, 2008 to 2014, 15? Like,
So,
what are other key developments or events that shaped
a really interesting thing where traditional media starts to change, and what you start, and this has been, I'm not the first and I won't be the last to talk about like the journalist as a media personality, but the other piece of that I think is maybe less talked about is to get clickbait, you need topics, right? So there was a lot of like strip mining, like Tumblr and Reddit for subcultures to write about, or like little oddities to write about. And those things may have never, may have never been like transmitted to like a larger audience if they didn't start getting written, because like, one person writes about it and gets a bunch of clicks or it goes viral, and then another person writes about it and another person expands on it. And I think like that had a huge impact on like just the ability of like how these pieces were then able to be shared, just like wildfire. Like, I don't think there's probably like no sort of like subculture or like sexual quirk that really surprises people anymore, because in this period of time, there's just an explosion of like, well, you'll never guess what people are doing in like this, Brooklyn nightclub. And it just, and then suddenly it's like 10 years later, that weird thing that everyone was doing in that one Brooklyn nightclub is like totally the norm. And, like you have a coworker who's talking about it like it's no big deal over lunch, right? So
this is like being a furry or something, sort of esoteric, weird.
It's like being a furry, or like even like, some parts of like the kink community, like that stuff's always been around. Or it's like been, if you were sort of alternative, it was always kind of on your radar, even if you didn't know about it explicitly. But now all of this stuff has been ripped out of the shadows and is center stage, because that's, submitting an article in that period of time was as easy as like a personal essay where you're sort of, participating in this humiliation ritual for clicks and $50, or you trawl Wikipedia or Reddit or Tumblr and you find something, you're like, oh, that's weird. I'm gonna, why not? I could get 500 words out of that, and 500 words and $50.
So one thing we haven't mentioned, I don't think, I guess just a little bit with mentioning OnlyFans, is like online porn and the total ubiquity of online porn. Do you see a movement against that? I mean, from the outside, it seems like with OnlyFans, like it's gone to the next level of like, not, you don't watch the porn, like you are the porn, and you can become like a mini porn star.
Already like pushing back against that though, because it's like, it only takes a few thousand people to realize that that if they're lucky, they'll make $300 a month. And now now they just, very intimate photos or videos of themselves are online forever. For people to start saying like, maybe we should start, regulating this, even if that regulation just comes through social stigma. And you already see it. You already see people saying like, look, I tried OnlyFans. I only made like a couple of $100 a month. I needed that couple of $100, but it really wasn't worth losing that privacy or losing the respect of my mom, or, whatever problem they ran into.
Do you how do you think about the people who are like this guy Sohrab Ahmari, who is a conservative Catholic? I think he's the editor of the New York Post opinion page, but he and sort of these people who want to return or create a sort of, religious America, and the thing that launched Ahmari into national consciousness was his objection to a drag queen story hour that was happening at his local public library. or actually, I don't even think it was his local public library. It was just one that it was happening somewhere in the country, and the thing went viral. And that's where, a drag queen will like read a children's book to a group of tots, and so that really angered him, and he's like, essentially Western civilization has already fallen. We need to retreat into some sort of Catholic, like mini state or something. Do you think that sort of thing could actually happen, or is that just something that people talk about a lot?
I'm not of that belief, but I understand why people would want that. And I even understand why like a drag queen story hour might, offend certain people's sensibilities, even if, I don't know if I totally agree. I don't think that it's possible to turn the United States into a theocracy, but I do think that there's a hunger for shared values, and the easiest way to find that is religion. I think like the drag queen story hour is like interesting because I don't think drag queens are inherently sexual, but I think it's like a campy performance that makes sense with like a certain context that I don't necessarily think is accessible to children. And it could be like, confusing. And, I could understand why why not everyone would be on the same page about that. And a religious community where there's clear rules, even if you don't agree with all of those rules, at least you have guideposts. Whereas now it's like, I think it's like kind of controversial for me to say like the mechanics of camp aren't necessarily intelligible to children. Like that might read as homophobic, but really like to me, it's like about the costumes and like what is it's supposed to express and like a theatricality that like a 5-year-old might not appreciate. But that's because we don't have shared values as a country.
Something that I've been thinking a lot about is that, the natural, there's sort of a moral censoriousness that arose on the left, at the same time that everyone was like getting okay with polycules and, BDSM fetishes, portrayed publicly. And it's often related to race, trans status, sometimes gender. I mean, race is the strongest one, and then this like feels cancel culture and stuff. But like there's moralism on both left and right, but it like moral values play traditionally a stronger role on the right than the left. But the right was being led for 5 years by Donald Trump, who was a totally amoral figure, and Donald Trump doesn't care about drag queen story hour. In fact, he kissed Rudy Giuliani when Giuliani was dressed in drag for a skit. So he has no, if he knows what that is, he doesn't care about it. But he's a totally, it's morality plays no role in his personal calculations. And so that's kind of a historical aberration. Usually, conservatives elect people who like don't brag about having sex with Playboy models and stuff. So now that Trump is mostly gone, largely faded from the scene, he actually just set up, did you see that he just set up this sort of personal Twitter-like thing on his website where he can type out tweet-like statements in a scroll so he can get his ideas out there. But he's basically absent from the public conversation now. It makes sense that the conservatism will return to its moralism, and conservatism will return to their natural alliance, and the stuff like the Amari stuff sort of, this also is like QAnon is part of this because the underlying belief of the QAnon people is that there's a cabal of satanic cannibalistic pedophiles who are killing and eating and raping children, and so obviously anyone would be against that if it were true, but sort of like save the children kind of stuff, I guess is like one of the emotional undercurrents of QAnon. So yeah, the left weirdly like embraced this sort of like quasi-religious ideology at the same time that the right
was just focused on the Trump, the Trump spectacle. And so that weird, the Trump spectacle is mostly gone, hopefully forever. And so I think the moralism will return to the right, although you do have these, the fact that Jerry Falwell Jr. turns out to, like be a cuck fetishist, like makes that somewhat harder, but that's sort of an old story, I guess, about the, traditional moral leaders actually being hypocrites, whatever. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe things will return to some sort of.
This is kind of like a strength of the right. There's like many different ways to be right wing, and if you're rejected by the left, the right will like try to sort of immediately recruit you, which it's become like a refuge, which it really shouldn't be, because you're right. Like traditionally, like the right wing is a place for like a certain set of morals, but the left has become so sort of like myopic and rigid that it isn't a place where you could like seek absolution and unite under maybe like a suite of causes. It's just sort of like either you're with us or you're against us, and also the goalposts are always moving, and we might like excommunicate you if you did something wrong 11 years ago, which is really scary for a lot of people. I think probably a lot of people are like defensively right wing, just to sort of be like, yeah, cancel me, but I'm already on the other side, so try your best.
Yeah, this is something that Elizabeth Brunig once tweeted, something like, you can't have a coherent culture where you're constantly searching for transgressions without there being a way to like have absolution and like penance and forgiveness. And the part of the, left side that is obsessed with like finding people to cancel, like, there's no absolution. There's no forgiveness. Whereas I guess with the right, you can always sort of, be born again, whether like literally or like sort of renounce your past sins and now you're, and now you're in their good graces again. Like, like that guy, I think he passed away a couple years ago, who was one of, Chuck Colson was his name. He went to jail because of, Watergate related crimes, and then like ended up starting like this prison ministries kind of thing. And so he got back in the good graces. And, there's no obvious way to do that besides like, you can't even like do a book report on like white fragility or something on the left and expect to be forgiven your past sins. So that's a unstable equilibrium, I think. Is there anything else? We've gone on for a while. Is there anything else you want to say about the podcast or sex, gender, other controversial topics before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that's all I have.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on. So After the Orgy is the podcast. You co-host it with another woman who has a pseudonym, Personality Girl, and you have guests on occasion. So people can find it wherever they, wherever they're listening to. If they're listening to this as a podcast, they can find it on that similar platform. It's all those places. And you are, where are other places that people can find you?
On Twitter,
find your content
all the time, all day, every day, every day of the year.
You do take breaks sometimes, though. Let's be honest. This is true. On occasion,
I will take like a 3 to 6 month long break, but generally, you can find me at default_friend or defaultfriend1word.substack.com. After the Orgies, basically everywhere where you could download a podcast.
And your Substack is, you both have essays on there and also like an advice column kind of thing where people are writing in and you're letting them, you're offering some advice on their various quandaries in life. So that I think that's an interesting thing to like. That whole, you could have a whole conversation about the way that advice columns have sort of like taken over some part of the discourse. Like, I don't know if you ever look at Slate, but about 50% of their content is now advice columns, and
the things they are discussing, the quandaries they're discussing are interesting to it's just like sociological objects on their own. So check all that stuff out. And you can also follow me on Twitter, REACW. You can rate and review this podcast wherever. You can smash that like button on YouTube, or you can leave a comment about how we're wrong about all this. Or you can do none of those things. You could just go on with your life and put your phone away and take a walk in nature and not even take a photo of a pretty leaf or something. Just send to a friend. Just savor the moment for yourself. The choice is yours. So thank you, default friend, for doing this. And thanks to our viewers and listeners. And we'll see you again next time.